Hey guys, in this video we're going to see if Ash's Kalos Rival, Sawyer, has a good or a bad team. Let's get right into it. I go with the Slurpuff, he goes with the Beedrill, goes for the Mega U-turn, goes into the Magnet Zone, and I go for the Sticky Web. I then switch into my Aegislash and he Volt switches into his Hydreigon and then takes me out with the Flamethrower. I then go into my Slacking, he switches into the Blaziken and I'm able to take him out with the Retaliate. He then goes back into his Magnet Zone, gets caught in those webs. I switch back into my Slurpuff. He goes for the Terra Fighting. Terra Blast does nothing to me. Go for the Misty Explosion, take myself out. I then switch into my Sceptile, go for the Mega Evolution, Giga Drain, able to take out the Magnet Zone. He then goes into his Tapu Fini, gets caught in those webs. I fire off a Leaf Storm, one-shot Tapu Fini. He then goes back into the Mega Beedrill. I decide to switch into my Salamence, get the Intimidated on the B over there. He goes for the U-turn and switches back into his Hydreigon. I then go for the Terra Steel, expecting a Draco, able to resist that. I then start dancing, and then he decides to switch back into the Beedrill. I go for the Dragon Claw, do a huge chunk, and then my opponent forfeits. Good game. At this time, I ask you guys to please like, comment, share, and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Without further ado, let's get into Game 2. Slurpuff starts by magic bouncing those sticky webs back. I then decide to go into my Salamence. He eventually gets his webs up. I start dancing over here. He then goes for the Memento, downs my stats, and takes himself out. He then switches into his Earthworm and gets caught into those webs. I just want to switch into my Clawitzer. He goes for the Stealth Rocks, gets him up. I then decide to go for the Aura Sphere, one-shot the Earthworm. He then goes into his Toxtricity, gets caught in those webs again. I decide to switch into my Sceptile, get caught in his webs and the rocks. He goes for the Shift Gear, gets his boost. I decide to Mega Evolve, go for the Giga Drain, gets resisted, get a little bit of health back. He goes for the Sludge Bomb, one-shots my Mega Sceptile. I then decide to switch into my Slacking, get hit with all those hazards. He goes for the Boom Burst, I'm able to hang on. He gets a Throat Sprite, but I'm able to take him out with the Retaliate. He then switches into his Absol, and I switch back into my Salamence. Get the Intimidate, he then decides to go for the Mega, starts dancing with swords right in front of my face. I go for the Terra Steel, start dancing right back at him. He goes for the Play Rough, but I'm able to resist that. I then go for the Iron Head and one-shot the Absol. He then goes into the Several Edge, gets caught in those webs. I go for the Earthquake, take him down to his Sash. He gets his weak armor boost, and is able to retaliate and take me out with the Bitter Blade. I then decide to go into my Aegislash, work my way through all those hazards, change into my Blade form, go for the Shadow Sneak, and take out the Several Edge. My opponent then forfeits. Good game. Alrighty, and then let's get into Game 3. He starts off with the Xatu, I start with the Slurpuff. I switch right into my Clawitzer, he sets up a Light Screen, then goes for the Future Sight, I go for the Dark Pulse, do a huge chunk. He then switches into his Tapu Fini, sets up the Misty Surge, I go for another Dark Pulse but do barely anything. He gets his lefties back, I then switch into my Aegislash, he goes for the Moonblast, does a nice chunk to me, and then I take the Future Sight, down to about half health now. He then switches into his Gyarados, I go for the Stance Change and the Flash Cannon, do barely anything to Gyarados. He then goes for the Mega Evolution, I go for the Shadow Ball but it's now resisted, and with the Light Screen do barely anything. He goes for the Crunch, takes out my Aegislash. I then decide to switch into my Slacking, go for the Retaliate, take out the Gyarados. The Surge goes away, and then he goes back into his Xatu. I then switch into my Salamence, get the Intimidate off, he sets up a Reflect, and his Light Screen goes away. He then switches back into Tapu Fini, gets the Surge back up, I start dancing with the Dragons, he gets a little bit of his lefties back, I go for the Terra Steel, Iron Head, but does barely anything, get a lucky flinch. I decide to go for another Dragon Dance, but he ends up going for the Haze, wiping away all my stat boost. He then switches into his Tinglu, activates the Vessel of Ruins, I go for the Iron Head, do barely anything to him. He gets some lefties, I decide to keep dancing over here, he goes for the Earthquake but takes out my Salamence. He gets some lefties, the Surge goes away, and then I go into my Sceptile, go for the Mega Evolution, hit him with the Leaf Storm, do a huge chunk, but he's able to hang on. He goes and sets up his Stealth Rocks, gets a little bit more lefties back, and then switches into his Jirachi. I go for another Leaf Storm, but it barely does anything to him with a minus special attack. I then decide to switch into my Clawitzer, take some rock damage, he goes for the Ancient Power, thankfully doesn't get the boost. Goes for another, doesn't get a boost again. I go for the Dark Pulse, take out Jirachi. He then goes back into his Tapu Fini, gets the Misty Surge up, I decide to switch into my Slurpuff, take some rock damage, go for the Moonblast, does a big chunk but I'm able to hang on. I then go for the Misty Explosion just to get max damage on the Tapu Fini, take myself out. I then go back into my Mega Sceptile. I go for the Giga Drain and take out the Tapu Fini. Get a little bit of my health back, now I'm sitting at full. He then goes into his Blaziken. I switch back into my Clawitzer. He goes for the Detect, but it fails. Gets a little bit of a speed boost going. Then he goes to Terra Flying, goes for the Brave Bird and takes out my Clawitzer. Takes some recoil, gets another speed boost. I then decide to switch back into my Slaking. He switches back into his Tinglu, activates the Vessel, but I'm able to take him out with the Retaliate. He then goes into his Xatu. I decide to switch back into the Mega Sceptile. He ends up setting up a Light Screen. I go for the Dragon Pulse, able to take out the bird. He then goes back into his Blaziken, goes for another Detect. I go for the Dragon Pulse, but he blocks it. He gets a little bit of a speed boost going on. I go for another Dragon Pulse, do a good chunk, but he's able to hang on and take me out with the Brave Bird. Ends up taking a big chunk of recoil, but he's still alive. Gets one more speed boost. I then go back into my Slaking. He goes for another Detect just to get max speed and to get me to loaf around. Blocks my Retaliate, goes for the Brave Bird. I hang on, and he has to take himself out with the recoil. Good game. And that's the video. Please let me know what you think about Sawyer's team down below, and please stay tuned for more future content. Peace!